careful, he's coming after you. That was the message from the Pharisees about Herod to Jesus. The bully. I remember and I picture Herod. I watched Jesus Christ Superstar, and there's a scene in there when Jesus is taken before Herod, and he's this big guy. He's got, all this gold and stuff on, and he's in this fancy mansion type area, and he asked Jesus, he said, Jesus, if you think you're so cool, why don't you just walk across my swimming pool? And I think of Herod as this big bully who just wants to intimidate everybody, but he really doesn't have much character at all. And so he sent Pharisees to tell Jesus, he said, Jesus, be careful. I'm going to get him. I'm going to kill him because he thinks he's a prophet. Tell Jesus to be careful. And I love Jesus' response when he's being bullied. We live in a world today where finally bullying is being lifted up. Is being brought to the forefront, and people are standing up against bullying. And what we see here today is not the Pharisees bullying Jesus, but we see Herod trying to bully Jesus and divert him from his mission. And in the world as Christians, when we walk different places and we go different and try to express our beliefs and stand up for what we believe in, there's a world that pushes back on us nowadays. And I think today in the Scriptures we have a good example of how we can react and how God expects us to react, because we have an example right here before us. Jesus says, you tell that fox. He knows who Herod is. He knows he's just a bully. He knows he's sly. He tries to do things from around the corners. He doesn't deal with anything direct. And he just says, you tell that fox. You see, Jesus has courage. He stands up. He's got his mind fixed on Jerusalem. He knows where he's going. He's taking his time getting there, but he is ready to go and serve how it is God has called him to serve. We're in our second week of Lent. We're 11 days into Lent. Last week we talked about facing our temptations. And if we're going to face our temptations, it's going to take courage out of all of us. And I asked you, if you're tempted, you need to go back to figure out why you're being tempted. What is it in your life that's causing that angst in your life? And I wonder how that's going. You've had 11 days of it so far. Have you been able to be as courageous as Jesus is when he's faced with the bully Herod and the warning from the Pharisees? He stands up boldly and he says, you go tell that fox that I'm going to continue to do what I do. I'm going to be who it is God has called me to be. And I know my purpose in the world. He stands up because he knows who he is. Do we as people of God, as we walk through this Lent season, are we willing to deal with who we are because we know who we are and whose we are? Are we willing to admit where we might fall short or what barriers we put up between us and God because we've forgotten whose we are? Are we willing to be courageous enough to say, God, here I am? That's what Lent's about. Lent's about God calling out saying, we're in the desert together, where are you? And us as people of God being courageous enough to stand up and say, this is who I am. This is really who I am. You see, Brene Brown did a TED Talk, and in her TED Talk she says, being courageous begins with us being able to show up and let ourselves be seen. Being courageous begins with us showing up and letting ourselves be seen. Think about that. In a world that wants to push back against us, in a world that really doesn't want to speak highly of our faith, in a world that sometimes thinks being a Christian is not a cool thing, are we, the people of God, willing to walk through Lenten season allowing ourselves to be seen? Are we willing to show up and be present? See, when the Pharisees found Jesus, I don't know what he was doing exactly, but I know that he was being able to be seen and be who it is God had created him to be. Lots of us want to show up in situations, but we're not going to let everybody see us. Because somebody might judge us. Somebody might think twice about us. I received a phone call one time, and I picked it up, and it was a friend of mine, and we'll just call him Smitty. And Smitty was on the other line, and I heard a desperation in Smitty's voice, and he said, "Barry, can I come see you?" Smitty was a prominent attorney in the town where I was at, and everybody knew Smitty. And he said, "Barry, can I come see you?" He wasn't a member of my church or anything. We were just friends. And I said, "Yes, come see me." And the next thing I know, he had to be sitting right out the church when he called. Because here comes Smitty in his fancy suit and his fancy tie, good-looking young man, and he comes walking through my office, and he speaks to everybody as comes through. He keeps that physical presence up, that image that all the world knows of him in this city because he's a prominent attorney, and everybody knows him, so he greets everybody and shakes hands with everybody and, hugs the women and pats the babies and all that kind of stuff. Comes through the crowd, and he gets into my office and gives me a big hug, and I shut the door, and he allows me to see him. He falls apart. He falls completely, utterly apart. He's shaking. Tears are running down his face. And I'm holding him in my arms. And for the first time in my life, I see the real Smitty. I ease him over towards, there was a couch in my office, and I set him on one end, and I sit on the other end. And I just let him be Smitty. You see, when Jesus is found by the Pharisees, he lets himself be seen as who he is. It's what we as the people of God have to do in our lives as we walk through this Lent season. We have to become vulnerable. If we're going to be courageous in the world for Jesus, we have to become vulnerable. We have to allow people to see who we are. We can't speak the message of God if we don't let what God has done in our lives be seen by everybody. Too many of us walk around in this world and we want to say we're a Christian and we want to grab our Bible and we want to wield our cross and wear our crosses around our necks, but we're afraid to let ourselves be seen. Jesus says right here, look, you tell that fox, I know who I am, and I know he doesn't like what I'm doing, but I'm going to continue to heal people, I'm going to continue to help people, and I'm going to continue to preach the gospel message today, tomorrow, and the next day. Jesus knew where he was going. Jesus knew what his purpose was. And Jesus knew who God had called him to be. And folks, we're not any different. Our role is not the role of the Christ, but our role is as a believer, one who's been redeemed by God through the power of Jesus Christ. We've been made new. The resurrection has made us new. The empty tomb has made us new people. All the stuff we've done in our lives, just like in the video this morning, when the guy said, if you really knew me, you wouldn't worry. Because he's been redeemed. You see, if we'll allow people to see who we are, if we'll have courage enough to put out all the fakeness, to lay down the being better than somebody, Christianity has nothing to do with being better than somebody. Christianity has something to do with about being the unique creation God has made you to be. Being a believer in Jesus is being able to go out and let people know who you are and what God has done. Smitty cried. I've never seen Smitty cry. He's a big, stout. He works out all the time. He's a great attorney. He does things for good for all people. Everybody in the world loves Smitty. And he's crying. And I'm his friend, and I've never seen this, but the pastor in me takes over and says, man, what's going on, Smitty? Smitty's in his second marriage. And he tells me boldly what happened to his first marriage, and he owns it. He owns it. It was his fault. Which I don't think it's ever one person's fault. But he owned it. And he said, I'm right back where I was in my second marriage that I never wanted to be at in my first marriage. And it's fallen apart. And I don't know what to do. You see, on that day, Smitty let me see who he was. Smitty talked to me honestly and openly about who he was and what was going on in his life. Do you remember I said Smitty didn't go to the church? I wasn't Smitty's pastor. I was his friend. And Smitty doesn't know my story. But you all know that marriage has been rough, and Mary and I have had our time, but we've been redeemed. And what better person than for God to lead Smitty to than a friend who's been there? God allowed me to be who it is God's made me to be and share what God's done in my life to help Smitty in that moment. I got to pray with Smitty. I got to tell Smitty a story about God's redeeming love and how God made things better and how it's continually a struggle, but God is always there if we make ourselves present. And I didn't do it by preaching. I did it by telling him a story, a witness, a true witness of what God had done. I didn't know how Smitty would react. You see, I wear this thing and people don't let me be human. They want you to be perfect and they put you on a pedestal. But we're human. Christians, don't let the world tell you you have to be perfect. You're human. You have to be courageous and vulnerable to walk out into the world and first face who you are every morning and allow God to speak new goodness into you every day. Because the world will try to bully you into saying that being a Christian is a bad thing. That following Jesus is a bad thing. But you know who you are today, tomorrow, and the next day because you have Jesus Christ in your life. You've been redeemed. You have the Spirit in you. And if you allow yourself to be vulnerable enough to say, God, this is who I am. Like Smitty did in my office that day when he opened himself to me and he said, Barry, I'm falling. And I need to be caught. I'm breaking. And I need to be made whole. And the only place I had to take Smitty that day was to the cross. And the cross was the form of the quiet sanctity of my office. And we went there together in spirit because I knew something about God that Smitty had forgotten. Jesus says, not only am I going to be here today, tomorrow, and the next day, but you, Jerusalem, who I know is going to be my ending place. You who kill the prophets who come to you, not condemning Jerusalem, but speaking the truth. God loves you. You, Jerusalem, the holy city. Do you know how much you're loved by God? And Jesus reveals the vulnerability of God when he uses the expression of a mother hen protecting her chicks. Do you not understand that you're loved so much that God wants to reach the wings like a mother hen reaches her wings around her chicks and gather them in and protect them? If you want to take that picture for a minute, and you want to see a mother hen who's wrapped her chicks around underneath her wings, who's the vulnerable one? It's not the chicks. It's the ones whose wings are extended around them to protect them and care for them and ward off all danger. The one who's to build them up again, to give them life, to give them a new day. It's the mother hen who spread her wings. It's our God in heaven who said to us, I know who you are. I know what you look like. I know where you've been. I know what you've done. Don't turn away. Be courageous. Allow yourself to be vulnerable and allow God to see who it is you really are. Folks, it's the Lenten season. We're making our way to the greatest day in Christian history. We're going to celebrate a resurrected Christ when we roll away the rock from the tomb. But we have to allow ourselves to be courageous enough to understand there is a God who loves us so passionately that we can just be who we are. We can overcome all the sin in our life if we lay it out before God. We can overcome all the things that are tearing up our marriage if we just allow God to be in our marriage. We can overcome the things that are the struggles in our homes as parents if we allow God to be in the scene of being a parent with us. We can overcome the stresses of our job, of our relationships, if we allow God to be in there. But it takes being courageous. It takes being vulnerable. The first step to being courageous is you have to be vulnerable. Put away the shield. Put away the mask. Lay aside the robe. Be who it is God has created you to be, even if you've messed up, even if you've gotten in the way. It's time to get out of the way. And know that it's God that wants to protect you, and God that wants to love you, and God that wants to take you under God's wings and form you new, and make you into a new person in this journey of Lent. We can't come out on the other side of Lent the same as we went in. If we do, we're denying the power and the beauty of the resurrection and the love of God has for God's creation. We are God's, and God wants to be in relationship with us. One of my favorite contemporary Christian bands is Casting Crowns. And I've had the blessing of seeing them in concert and listening to them. And I'll tell you that it moved me. The auditorium was completely full of people. I mean, completely full of people. And there was a lady, and she was standing there, and she had a little 8-year-old, 9-year-old girl standing next to her. And they were playing their praise songs, and they were singing their songs. And I could not watch the band because I was watching this 9-year-old girl. She didn't give a flip who was looking at her. She didn't care who was around her. She didn't care what anybody thought about her. She didn't care when her mama put her hand on her shoulder for her to settle down a little bit. Because I'm telling you, the girl was sold out. She had nothing but praise for Jesus. She was jumping. She was doing the kid things that she wanted to do because the Spirit of God was reminding her who she was through the power of the music of Casting Crowns, reminding her that she was a loved child of God. Casting Crowns sings a song called Courageous. And what they say to us is that when we're courageous, we become courageous by being on our knees with our hands held high. It doesn't mean standing out in front of somebody boasting how strong you are, how big you are. It means about being vulnerable to God. Because what we really want to be is we want to be in that intimacy with God. There's nothing more than the human spirit desires than to have an intimate relationship with the one who created us. It was Christmas. I got a letter in the mail. It was from Smitty. I recognized the address and I began to open the envelope. For those of you who don't, that was before email. He wrote me a letter, put an envelope, put a stamp on it, and put it in the mail. 2.5 pages long. Telling me about what a difference my willingness to see him that day and to be vulnerable enough to tell him my story, God's story, and where he was today. I still talk to Smitty. Smitty's marriage has been redeemed. He and his wife have found a new understanding of who Jesus is. They're not perfect, but they're a good sight better than they were on that day. Folks, it's the Lent season. God calls us into this day, into tomorrow, and into the next day. And each and every day, we're asked to be exactly like our Savior was on that day. Be vulnerable enough to be courageous. Allow yourself to let God see you so that others can see God through you. Amen.